Our next session is called Quickfire Presentations with the Milwaukee Art Museum and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. From the Milwaukee Art Museum, I'm pleased to introduce Beret Balestrieri Kohn, Manager of Digital Assets, and Heather Winter, who's the Head of Knowledge Management and Digital Assets. They're going to be discussing taking the hit with a false digital asset management start and how the Milwaukee Museum turned it around. Following this, we'll turn to Jessica Knight, Senior Advisor for Digital Ecosystems, Preservation and Discovery at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, who will be discussing Break It Till You Make It, how the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum scaled its dam to just 10 million assets in a year. And these are great presentations. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to return to moderate a Q&A session after these presentations. Heather and Bret, we'll turn this first over to you, and thank all of you for sharing your knowledge today. You've brought together a global community of over 2,000 professionals, and it's great to be here.
Thank you so much, David, for inviting Heather and I to participate. Welcome, everyone. I'm Beret Balestrieri Kohn from the Art Museum, Manager of Digital Assets, and I'm going to share my screen, and we will get ourselves started here. Okay, so as you might have heard, we are going to be discussing what we had at the museum in the last decade or so was our false start. When we started into digital asset management, we didn't really understand that it was digital asset management, and we had a very, very narrow focus. So moving on, we invested in a dam that did not to get the images out on the web. That's all we need. We need more images of things on the web. We had a little bit of senior management support through that the beginning phase, but one person who really sort of guided us through the whole thing. And as long as we got the images on the web onto our website of objects in the collection, then we were good, and there wasn't anything else that we needed to consider. We had a small core group of staff who were tasked with seeking a proper system, but there was little to no discussion of whether the focus should widen to encompass a larger management of digital assets across the institution. There were a couple of us who did say, hey, this does need to be a bit larger than that. But considering that the core stakeholders were IT and the staff who managed the website, and very little discussion with any other departments and their digital asset management needs, we went through a series of selections and came upon a dam that didn't really meet all of our needs put together. Once selected, the dam was integrated into the object module of the museum's collection database, but the integration was very bespoke, it was very complicated, and it left the integration very fragile, very difficult to maintain, and there was a lot of technical development work in the background just to keep it running. We also did not have any senior management support through anything further than the initial investment phase. After that, senior management was like, great, we've got images online, we're fantastic. And that was pretty much as much as we got from anybody. So the singular focus, we've got images on the web, but not exactly what we really needed for actual digital asset management throughout the institution. So going forward, the years are passing. We never expanded beyond the initial integration with the object module in the museum's collection database. The dam never expanded to really include more of the museum's assets. The bespoke integration, not just being too complicated, but it wasn't even really repeatable. The collection database has an exhibition module that would have been able to bring over metadata to support images of the exhibitions, installations, things like that. But it was just too complicated and too fragile to do that. The dam never supported the website's digital assets, despite the intentions otherwise. In the early days of the museum's website, it was the collections database that sent those images out to the web, and that continues to current at this point. Something that we were hoping to change and never did. Support of the dam was also reduced to 3 staff members, one from IT, the person who managed the collections database, and the media archivist, who was myself, with little to no authority to leverage the dam across departments, and again, no senior management support at all. We also had a lack of staff engagement and usage with the dam. Key stakeholders, key users were identified and trained to use the dam, but adoption into the workflows and actual regular use was not successfully established. And that's because the dam that was selected had a very clumsy interface. It was very difficult to navigate. On the administrative side, it almost required a developer skill to navigate and set things in the background, such as permissions, how images are searched for, things like that. Some staff had trouble with basic navigation and flat out refused to use it. So we were really in a really rough spot. In addition, no other assets were available except for images of the collection. As I mentioned, we were not able to interface with other modules in the collections database. We also were in a position where the museum's collection had not been fully photo documented. We only had about a quarter of the museum's collection documented. Even if we could get the images successfully out on the website, there wasn't much to see. And that's because the museum had not ever established a photography department, nor did we have a full-time staff photographer. So even with just having the ability to have the object module integration, there wasn't much to put in and see, and photographers were brought in only on an as-needed contract basis. So visually, the staff could never see the dam growing, looking like it was being used, like it had more to offer. So it wasn't absolutely fantastic. And finally, the rest of the digital assets that we were creating exponentially were growing in the wild on our network file folders as the years passed, and we desperately needed to corral all of that together. But sometimes time solves everything. So in 2018, the museum received a substantial grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to support the museum's efforts to make our content more easily accessible, to corral it, to bring it together, and to also make it accessible in-house and online. In addition, the COVID-19 pandemic, in its own silver lining, was probably the best thing that could ever have happened to our museum, and that our doors closed to the public. No one was physically walking in, and we were not able to share the museum's collection and our stories because there wasn't much online to offer. And there was this fantastic scramble to get as many videos up as possible, to suddenly now create digital programs that we had never really spent the time doing, making that available, and then being able to manage all of those digital assets that we were creating at lightning speed. So this really compelled the museum to double its efforts on digital asset management and digital access. And then finally, in addition, in 2021, we received additional funds from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, IMLS. The core of that project was to support efforts to digitize underrepresented artists in the museum's collection. But what that also enabled us to do was to bring about a greater support for the photography program, the documentation program for the museum. So with all of these fantastic opportunities, perhaps a bit manna from heaven, I think the universe might have looked at us and, maybe felt a little bit sorry for us. But with Mellon funds, the museum was able to migrate to a new dam system, a system that has a much improved user interface, flexible and relational for the assets, greater metadata capabilities, and also a simplified integration with the objects module in the collections database for the free flow and mapping of metadata already existing, and to add additional metadata to really establish proper schemas and make these images, these digital assets, assets available to the staff, and also create a template that is repeatable and can be applied to other modules. So you might imagine the exhibition module is the next one to come around. And as I said, IMLS was able to support a more robust digital photography program to document the museum's collections and archives. This included bringing on a full-time photographer for the museum, and also to begin the process to determine a space for a permanent studio. In previous decades, a photographer would come in, set up and shoot wherever there was room to be had. So we're really putting down the foundation for a serious photography program. And this is going to expand to a larger media creation program as well when it comes to video recording and audio recording and producing more digital programs that will come out on to the website. We were also able, in our Greater Dam program, to create a center of excellence. We know it as our community of practice, with key stakeholders from many of the departments throughout, not just a handful of people here and there. And the dam is being integrated into the museum's creative processes and workflows. It is now at the beginning and the end of a cycle of a project. It is part of a project throughout, whatever the creative departments are bringing about. And finally, this was also allowed for a full refresh of the museum's website. So not only are we gathering our assets together, we have a website now that is going to make them easier to be accessible, to make our content more fully available, and to begin to really tell the stories behind the collection. So while we kind of wandered a bit, I believe as David mentioned it, we wandered in the desert of Dam for a while. We knew what we wanted to do. We just weren't quite sure how to get there. We are now at a point where we are exactly on the straight and narrow path where we need to go with Dam. And all of this is culminating in the creation of a knowledge management initiative. And with that, I will hand it over to Heather Winter for her additions for knowledge management.
Thanks, Beret. So I am Heather Winter. I'm the head of knowledge management and digital assets here at the Milwaukee Art Museum. I'm here today just to share a bit of insight into the knowledge management department, wherein the Dams and Beret and her teams are situated. The department was established in late 2021. The knowledge management department encompasses the Art Research Center, which includes the library, the institutional archives, manuscript collections, special collections, rare books, and archives beyond that, along with the digital asset and photography teams. So these various departments actually manage 3 of the 4 museum-wide collection databases. So this move, I think, is particularly forward-thinking on the museum's behalf, in that united within one department are many of the key languages and tools of knowledge management, including anything from a library's MARC records to formal metadata schemas such as Dublin Core, and formal taxonomies such as Getty, Art and Architecture Thesaurus. The individual knowledge management teams work together to develop each of the 3 systems, 2 of which are barely in their toddler stages, about a year old at this point, and we've begun to map out opportunities for future metadata crosswalks. We've begun to talk about which systems will function as these sources of truth so that we can avoid data duplication and release staff time both on the cataloging end and on the search end of system use. We all know knowledge is all around us. It is in our 130-year history, hopefully in our 130-year future. But knowledge is system agnostic. Frankly, we don't really know what we don't know yet. And here's a really good example. Recently, while photographing a block print for the IMLS grant, the preparator shared an image of a block print with me, and it was totally cool, which is the reason she shared it with me. We had no information listed in our object database other than the last name of the artist, a partial title of the work, a year. Each of those notations were on the block print itself. And within the object database was a note stating WPA. Having worked on both the museum's exhibition history, which I'm currently transferring to the museum's object database, and having cataloged a significant number of the museum's rare books, I recognize the block print as having been made during a 1930s project when the then museum's director was also the head of the Milwaukee Public Schools Art Education Department. The block print was part of an annual calendar of block prints made by public high school students. The work and the copyright were transferred to the WPA shortly after the exhibition in 1930. Today, we have a full title of the work, a full student name. We have copyright information. We have a full date of the exhibition, details for calendar publication, and the work is now connected within the object database to the exhibition history checklist, which means it's searchable. These connections that I mentioned are each in one of the three systems that we manage. So it's no longer in my head alone, which is good for everyone. So that being said, assets really in any system are just items. Data connections, that's where the knowledge is. So the mission of our department, the Knowledge Management Department, is to future-proof collection information by developing cross-departmental workflows and taxonomies to capture, maintain, and strengthen access to the museum's history. So I encourage you all to check back in a year and see where we're at. And in the meantime, I'll send this over to Jessica. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Heather. I will definitely be checking back in with you in a year and see where you guys are. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Screen check. Heather, I can still see you. If you can give me a nod, great.
You're good to go.
Thanks so much, David. All right. Well, thank you all for having me. My name is Jessie Knight. I'm the Senior Advisor for Digital Ecosystem Preservation and Discovery at the Rubenstein Institute for Holocaust Documentation in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We are located in Washington, D.C., and while we're neighbors to many of the Smithsonians, we are not a Smithsonian museum. My job within the Rubenstein Institute is to manage the development of major digital systems for preservation, management, and online access to the collection of record. One of the systems that I oversee is the museum's digital asset management system, which internally we call the Vault. I firmly believe the point of technology, especially the systems I manage, is to be in service of the purpose and mission of the institution. And our primary mission is to advance and disseminate knowledge about the Holocaust, to get people to think about how and why it happened, and to preserve the memory of those that suffered. And central to that mission is ensuring that we have as much evidence as possible available to staff, scholars, and the general public. So I titled this presentation, Break It Till You Make It, because what I'd like to discuss here with the DAM community, especially in the cultural heritage sector, is what happens when technology is not ready to serve mission. When the mission feels so urgent that you will break technology, develop workarounds, impact internal users, and make staff and support contractors work early mornings and late nights just to keep the gears turning. But we'll get to that story. So to give you some background information on our collection and the digital scale we're working with, our digital collections comprise about a petabyte of storage, and we're continuing to grow every year. We have over 1.1 million images of personal papers that have been digitized in-house. We have over 90 million images of international archival copy collections duplicated from other archival repositories in 58 countries around the world. We have over 27,000 oral history interviews digitally available, 1,000 recorded sound collections ranging from radio broadcasts to war crime trial recordings, 5,600 historical films that have been made digitally available, and over 1,200 digital images of artifacts. And our goal is to centralize all of these assets into our digital asset management system for staff use and to feed our various web properties. So how did we get to now? We had a plan, and it was definitely not to consistently overtax and break our dam. So starting in 2019, we began working on a multi-year, multi-phase project to stand up a new enterprise-level dams. In 2019, bleeding into 2020, we started what we call Phase 0. Our team stood up and configured a new enterprise-level dam. we worked with staff around the institution to develop search and detail page configurations and develop an extensive training program. Between 2020 and 2021, we started the migration of over 1 million assets from an open source DAM into the new enterprise system. This material was our personal paper collections, recorded sound collection, our institutional photographs from museum events, and we officially went live to all staff in the late summer of 2021. Then the team began the process of integrating the DAM with our online catalog collection search, and the amazing phase 1 team disbanded. In 2022, we launched 4 new teams and began a 2-month discovery process to assess how to complete the next phase. We knew phase 2 was going to be a different beast than phase 1. It would most likely take years. Our international archival copy collection is massive, currently sitting at 90 million files. It was our job to figure out how to ingest them and make them accessible. There were some knowns. We knew we were going to have scaling issues. We started conversations with our support contractors about how and when to add more processing power and how and when to deal with load balancing if and when we got to the point that we might have this massive search index. We also had many internal conversations about how to prioritize ingests, how we would do our testing. We weighed factors like the size of the collections, our ability to make them publicly available on the web, whether or not they had staff requests. And we exited discovery in February of 2022. And we had a pretty good idea of how to tackle ingest. Additionally, there were 2 other customization development projects that we had in the works. The first was a self-service fulfillment form. The idea with this was to develop a custom web form that let the public request certain assets out of our DAM. The request would be packaged up as a zip file, and a download link would be sent to the user via email. And the second customization would allow us to queue and control our ingestion pipeline. As I said, our phase 2 collections are massive. In some cases, it could take well over a week to ingest a single collection. So we needed a way to ensure we could slot in the ingest of newly created phase 1 materials like personal papers and institutional photographs without the phase 2 collections completely dominating the ingest pipeline. This queuing customization would essentially create hot lanes in our ingest workflow. So here's what those customizations look like within the context of our digital ecosystem. You can see this queuing customization sits as a gatekeeper for the material going from the preservation system into the DAM. And the self-service form appears as a link on record pages in our online catalog collection search. So that was the plan at the beginning of February of 2022. What we didn't plan for was the Russian invasion of an independent democratic Ukraine, and that the pretext that Vladimir Putin would offer was the need to denazify the country. So there are certain moments in time when we felt that access to the evidence of the Holocaust can have a unique and powerful impact and make a statement, and this was one of those times. The museum first began working with Ukraine after the fall of the Soviet Union. Over a period of almost 25 years, the Holocaust Museum has been duplicating some 16 million pages of documentation from over 20 state and private archives in Ukraine. We forged deep partnerships with our colleagues in Ukraine, so much so that in 2020, the head of the State Archives of Ukraine granted us access to put all of the copied documents on the public web. These collections include materials related to the pre-war, wartime, and post-war history of Ukrainian Jewish communities and individuals. And after months of war and the destruction of people's lives and property, the continued threat of further destruction of the Ukrainian cultural sites, we considered it a moral imperative to make these materials digitally available. The significance of providing access to these documents and enabling ongoing research just cannot be overstated. Ukraine had one of Europe's largest pre-war Jewish populations. At least 1.5 million Jews were killed within the country's current borders. That's 1 out of every 4 Jewish victims killed during the Holocaust. So we didn't just want technology to serve our mission, we needed technology to serve our mission. Of those 16 million pages, almost 10 million files exist in digital format. That was around 11% of our entire phase 2 project. Our phase 2 teams, who are absolutely incredible, made a major pivot and worked at lightning speed. We decided to ingest the Ukrainian collections from smallest to largest, so we could launch with the first 1 million images in the summer. But just to give you a sense of the jump in scale, as we started working with these international collections, the average size of a personal paper collection is 430 images, compared to the average size of a Ukrainian collection, which is 115,000 images. The largest Ukrainian collection we have is 2.7 million images. We dealt with a massive jump in scale of our access infrastructure. We identified and resolved slow loading times, developed workflows to create usable hierarchical container lists for when we had archival descriptions and when we didn't, and developed the technical infrastructure to present additional archival descriptions in order to navigate these large data sets. All the while, we were ingesting Ukrainian collection data into the dam as fast as we could and pulling as much data out for access. You may notice in all this activity, the deployment of our customizations got pushed further and further down our roadmap, but they did eventually go live. In the early summer of 2020, we launched the self-service form internally for testing. Responses were generally positive, so in September, we launched to the public. Immediately, we noticed a couple of things. Number one, many external users didn't understand that they had successfully submitted the form. And so we saw that they were submitting the same request multiple times. We've since resolved this issue by redirecting them to a different page to indicate that they've successfully completed their requests. And we've seen duplicate requests pretty much vanish. But the second thing we noticed was that extremely large patron requests seemed to have the potential to impact ingest in certain circumstances, and we didn't fully understand the root cause at the time. Then, in October of 2022, we began using our new queuing customization. You can see here in this chart how we segmented our ingest pipeline. This customization was the straw that broke the camel's back. It was at this time that we completely broke the system. And what I mean by break is that we had too much going on at the same time. Stalled processes caused memory issues, led to the system seizing up. So you can see here a timeline of documented emergency reboots. And I'm pretty sure I've missed a few frantic Slack messages just asking our vendor to reboot the system in this count, but these are the documented ones. You can see that as we started ingesting larger and larger Ukrainian collections, as people started discovering the download button and were submitting requests in triplicate, as we pushed the limitations of the queuing customization, the impact of trying to do all the things all at once was significant. So the whole team had a very stressful November. We had 10 emergency reboots. Usually what would happen is the system would seize up in the middle of the night, which meant that our patrons in Europe couldn't use the self-service form for hours. But thankfully in December, things started to improve. Our amazing support team triangulated around some of the worst issues. They implemented configuration changes to the system, which made some dramatic improvements. We made that change to the self-service form I discussed to redirect to a different page. And we started doing weekly scheduled reboots every Thursday. So in January, we only had one emergency reboot. And I had hoped we would get through February in the clear, but unfortunately we had to reboot the system this past Tuesday. So was it worth it? Was it worth not slowing down, continuing to push through these growing pains? Well, here are some of the results. In the first 3 months since the launch of the self-service form, we've had over 6,200 users download almost 1.1 million assets out of the system. We can see that a quarter chose not to self-identify, but 25% were working on film or creative projects, 15% were academic researchers, and 12% were students or teachers. As far as the Ukrainian collections go, so far we've ingested 6.7 million images from Ukrainian collections, 68% of what is in our dam today. Of that, we've put 60 collections on the web for anyone around the world. And we're seeing users come from all around the world. We've seen a 411% increase in page views as compared to the same time last year. We're seeing much longer time on page stats, and we're seeing lower bounce rates. These numbers are coming from Google Analytics, so we don't know exactly who these people are. But something I find particularly interesting that we're seeing is that 82% of page views to these pages have their browser language set to Ukrainian or Russian, as compared to 20% at this time last year. So if the question is, are we getting this material to the community who can no longer access the original records? This gives me hope that the answer is yes. And even though it sometimes feels like controlled chaos and that we are in this endless break-fix cycle, these numbers and this reach is what it looks like when technology serves mission. And we have an incredible support and development team, to help us muddle through it. So, would we break it again? Yes, and we probably will. So thank you.
Jesse, we had a very compassionate question come in. What are you doing to take care of the staff to make sure that you don't burn out?
That's a great question. I think we've all cried at least twice. As you can imagine, the Holocaust Museum does have a support network for dealing with traumatic materials. And so, we do encourage staff to reach out whenever possible to the existing services that the museum offers.
Thank you for that. And thank both of you for a presentation that helps everyone learn to go forward and reacting through, in the case of what's going on with the Ukrainian material, a dialectic of the unexpected that's probably turned your life into a lot of the dialectic of the unexpected. So, and thank you both. On a little more practical and slightly more mundane note, Heather or Beret, you can see who wants to answer this. Who spearheaded the grant process from upper management, and how did you solicit their support?
Wow. We have to say that the Mellon comes to you. You don't go to Mellon. So that in that particular case, it was Mellon surveying institutions who needed to corral and manage their content. And they were specifically looking for 3 different cases, one to be a very large museum, and I can't remember if it was one of the larger museums out east. They were looking for a mid-sized museum where a collection of about 30,000 works. So we tend to fit that bill. And then they were looking for a museum, smaller museum or cultural institution, like a historical society size, whatever, and to provide financial support to help its staff be able to survey its entire institution of content and bring it into some sort of order. And for us, having had a false start with DAM, I think they saw in us the ability to say, okay, well, you did all right the first time, but we think you've got the potential to really take it if you have certain things underneath that would be of great help. And honestly, I think when Mellon comes calling, usually senior management goes, okay, perhaps this is far more important, than we realized. So in that particular case, that's what how that came about. And IMLS was us putting our scope out, trying to figure out what else we might be able to do, and we applied for the IMLS grant, and we were lucky enough to receive that, because we also have a greater initiative in the museum to speak more to DAI and really bring out and make available the works by underrepresented artists. We have such collections at the museum, such as the museum's Haitian collection, which is one of the largest outside of Haiti, as an example. And I think as the way that we brought it to IMLS was enough for them to come and help us out. But it was huge. It helped us really establish a photography department that we had not had before, which is unusual, but you know,
Yeah.
our history has
Yeah.
always been, if we've got everything, that's just enough. We're good.
And Heather, maybe from your your perspective, what's being done to transition this to hard budget lines?
That's a great question because we still are kind of in the throes of IMLS and Mellon financially. We actually had a recent really valuable conversation with the rest of the COP team, the community of practice, and those are leaders from multiple departments. And we really just laid it out what the needs for staff were, not needs for technology, not needs for other things. And we indicated that these aren't grant cycle staff members. If we want to do what we do best, these need to be long-term employees. What was great about that experience is it was attended by 2 members of the senior leadership team. And that's really key, is that now with knowledge management having so many different departments and systems together, we can more easily point out where the gaps are and more easily indicate that we need a person at this educational level, we need a person at this experiential level. So that particular meeting, I think, was really a turning point in helping us to clarify to the senior teams that we need this to be part of the yearly budget. Again, check back in a year.
Oh, I'd like to hear you figured that out in 6 months. So let's go for 6 months.
We'll talk.
So, yeah. Jesse, we had a question come in. Do you store in the arriving format, say, for example, of images, or do you mandate to a standard format for deposit into the systems that you're building?
We do store in the arrived format, but usually we normalize to an access format. It really depends on what the material type is.
And a second question came in for you. Are you continuing to acquire collections, records, while this other very large and very more time-sensitive project is going on?
Yes, we never stop acquiring at the museum. It seems like there's a new tranche of material coming in every day.
No doubt. This is a question that came in for both of you, and it was a question about the broader ecosystem. We're going to be having a lot of conversation in the field of dam about life cycle asset management, and it's a question this community knows quite well about archiving and preservation, and about the meaning of those words in a deeper context. So a question came in. Could you kindly ask the speakers if they use something? What is used elsewhere from a preservation point of view? Is there Preservica or Rosetta or some system like that? Heather, I'll start with you.
I'll have Beret respond to that.
Beret, we'll start with you.
That's right. Not as yet. As our new dam and the migration are barely 6 months old, we're not quite at that point yet. We're still trying to get our dam to get into workflows, figure it out. One of the other things that we are working on is expanding our storage, and thereby speaking about the preservation, how we archive these master assets. Are we doing it locally? Are we doing hybrid? Are we doing cloud? And I'm starting to look at a number of programs. So if anyone suggests one, that would be fantastic. But it is in the back of our mind as we start check back in a year. That's going to be it's the refrain. Check back in a year because that is on our radar in our short term, that as we really start to cement the dam, that we are going to be moving toward the preservation side of those assets.
Great. Thank you. Jesse?
So we have a separate preservation repository that we use. Our dam is truly our access point. So what we do is we evaluate what is our best foreseeable use copy that users might need, and what is our preservation version. And the preservation version is stored in our preservation repository, we have 3 geographically distributed copies. We do have, we use LibSafe from the company LibNova, and we have, many preservation workflows set up, and then rules for either what gets exported and then ingested into the dams, or in some cases, it's a parallel process where it goes into the preservation repository and the dam at the same time.
Great. I'm so glad to see that question come in. We're having some meetings that start next week on adding a facet to the digital asset management capability model called asset lifecycle management. And to just, I know, to enter, it's just another, that like all of this, it keeps going too. So check back in a year. Jesse, I was wondering if we could end, if there's a moment of reflection or a story of this past in and amongst all the busyness and the hard work that your teams put in from the Ukrainian accession and experiences that you'd like to share.
I think the one that comes to mind that it really touched me and impacted me is the story of one of our digitization partners. As you can imagine, when you duplicate 16 million of pages in archives in a country, you form deep partnerships with people who are on the ground doing the work. And we had ongoing digitization projects going on at the time that the war broke out. So one of our digitization partners actually took 2 hard drives of material from those digitization projects, and it was one of the few possessions that this man took with him into the metro tunnels in Kyiv, and kept with him to make sure that this material was kept safe. And I heard that story, and it was just it was, both touching how meaningful the work was to him and impactful, to get these stories out to the world.
Jesse, thanks so much for that. And Beret and Heather, for the insights that you've shared today, the work that you're doing to help advance the meaning of assets into the world in so many different ways. I've enjoyed getting ready for this session with you as always, and I look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you bet. So our concluding session for the day is up next, and it's called The Changing Digital Landscape: Why We Must Have a Forward-Thinking, Agile, and Creative Approach to Enhance the User Experience and Better Workflows. My friend and our colleague, Elspeth Cowell, who's head of digital media at the Canadian Centre for Architecture, will be joining me in just a couple of minutes. Thanks, everyone.